Hello and a very warm welcome, viewers. It's this week's edition of Economics 101, where on this program we invite experts in various sectors as well as areas to dissect issues to do with the gross domestic product of Zimbabwe. Now, as we stand in Zimbabwe, at the present moment, we're speaking of uncertainty, conflagration, as well as a confusion with the exchange rate in Zimbabwe. And generally, the outcome of all this on the people of Zimbabwe is that they are suffering and from these unjust prices that are currently being viewed in Zimbabwe. And the great question of the day is that what can be done to redress this economic wrong that has ravaged many households and ordinary Zimbabweans? And is this now the order of the day, or measures have been put in place by government as well as key players instead of profiteering that is currently taking precedence? And joining me in studio today is Mr. Farai Museta, a legal expert who will divulge into the framework as well as legalities around some of this economic activity, some of it being criminal. Mr. Farai Museta, we thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Thank you for having me. It's
great. Looking forward to the conversation. And in your view, as we begin, as a legal practitioner of note, can you give us a general overview of our economy vis-a-vis the exchange rate itself and the strain in the retail sector?
Okay, it's a very good question. Right, I'm not an economic expert by profession. I am a legal professional. However, what I can say is that, of course, I myself can comment definitely as a consumer, as a legal professional, and as a business person.
Okay.
Right. Zimbabwe is currently facing what we typically call a hyperinflationary condition right now. So obviously, most people would ask, okay, what does hyperinflation, what does that essentially mean? Well, hyperinflation is typically caused by the escalation of prices, on a regular basis, which means prices of goods and services go up, and essentially that creates an inflationary situation. So you find that obviously the bread basket goes up, people aren't earning as much as the increases are going up. So you find that that's not a good situation for any consumer.
Okay.
Right. Be that as it may, it would be good to note that the fundamentals in our economy, or that have been put in place, haven't essentially changed. Right. A lot of this price escalation is based on speculation, and our economy is very sensitive to speculative forces. So you find that any form of speculation through media, through press, tends to create a panic. Right, and as a result, you find that that creates high prices on people trying to speculate on pricing to cover this, to cover that, so on and so forth, instead of reacting to, actual macroeconomic forces which are real and tangible.
Absolutely.
It's more speculation than anything.
And has the speculation affected your line of trade with regards to perhaps even some of the cases you're now handling in your legal space?
Well, if I could answer that question in a more, in this way, if I can say, is that I wouldn't say the Fiscal or the current situation has altered our cases in terms of the work that comes to us, right? It's essentially a situation, there's an increase or decrease in types of cases. So you'd find that matters to do with evictions or debt collection, people failing to honor their obligations financially, typically go up in a situation like this. However, but you would find, interestingly enough, that property transactions are fairly quite frequent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
even in this crisis.
Even in this crisis, which is surprising. You'd find that developments like people who are into development of property, stands, housing developments, they are selling out the stands before construction even occurs.
Oh, yes.
Right, which shows that there is money circulating. Something is happening. The issue is that the mechanics of it hasn't quite been managed properly. Right, but you'd find that Vic Falls is a good example. It being declared a special economic zone, there's been a slight boom with regards to activities there. Economically, you'd find that commercial as well as residential land spaces, values have gone up.
Okay.
And people are buying like it's hotcakes.
Most definitely. And
Yes.
that brings me to my next question, Mr. Museta. We are speaking about buying, and perhaps we do have an appreciation that you did say that the property business is booming at this time. But what is the current currency that is being used to buy these properties?
Well, that's actually a fair question, because typically it's the US dollar.
Yes.
And of course there are RTS transactions.
Yes.
right? So typically the preferred denomination, right, is the US currency,
Yeah.
right? Because of the fact that there's issues to do with predictability
Yes.
and also stability, and there's no need for adjustment of pricing. For example, people enter an agreement today and it's to be concluded after 6 weeks. There's no need to adjust prices.
Well, that's where the speculative pricing aspect comes in. And we are in a multi-currency regime at the present moment. And, you know, that is the modus operandi of our nation as Zimbabwe. In your view, from your legal perspective, what you've seen happening in the markets, can we say, or can we safely come home and say that the US dollar is what we should stick to as a nation? At the end of the day, Zimbabwe does need an identity. And we do need something that we say is our own. The RTGS dollar was the answer to that. But at the present moment, can we still move with that as an answer, in your view?
Right. I think my assessment on that issue is basically that we must understand that the world, or the fiat system as we know it, which is the international sort of like monetary system, we have a situation where there is what's called a reserve currency. Right, a reserve currency is basically has been pegged against the US dollar.
Oh yes.
So most countries, whether it's governments, reserve banks, federal banks, they've been essentially stocking up or saving in default currency as the US dollar.
Yes.
So typically these US dollars are floating around in most of international markets. So you find that when there becomes instability in the local currency of that particular country or jurisdiction, the people tend to resort now to the reserve currency. It's almost like a default position. So typically that's what people start to trade in. But if we were to say, for example, that we should stick to the dollar, I agree with your sentiments that Zimbabwe needs an identity.
Yes.
And in fact, issues of sovereignty now come in, so on and so forth, because when you have a foreign currency, you are open to manipulation by those foreign forces. You are unable to dictate or control the volumes of your transactions, how much money comes in, how much money goes out. Hence, you find government has had to regulate the movement of money, given the fact that it's not our currency. So in terms of improving our situation, Zimbabwe must resort eventually to its own currency that we can manage and control. And this gold-backed coin is a step in the right direction in my
All right, more on that. We'd love to definitely have an appreciation of what you mean by gold-backed coin. We are still here with Mr. Farai Museta, and we are speaking all things to do with the current exchange rate here in Zimbabwe. My name is Kurtley Gwindi. This is Economics 101. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Economics 101. We are here with Mr. Farai Museta, legal expert. Back to you, sir. We would like to know, before we get into the gold-backed currency situation that you just brought to the table, how can we legally protect our currency as Zimbabweans? We are speaking to a situation perhaps that we are using pounds, we are using US dollars, we are using rands, a multi-currency regime. But at the same time, if we are going to tap into these currencies and totally neglect what we have as Zimbabweans, how best can we be legally protected?
Well, it's a bit of a difficult question in the sense that typically legal protection of a currency isn't per se a thing, but there is a situation where a currency is declared to be legal tender. Right, that legal tender essentially now gives that currency power to transact, right, to be as a means of exchange, right. So that being the case, the Zimbabwean RTGS as well as the US dollar are considered legal tender, right. That being the case, what I've observed is that the government has put in place measures to encourage the use of the ZW.
ZW.
Yes, right. That way, by encouraging, for example, tax payments or remittances being done in local currency, payments to utility companies, major service providers like electricity and local authority to actually pay in ZW. And even if you're dealing with government institutions, the benefit is that you can use the ZW with regards to payments. So that is a way of encouraging use of it.
Yes.
And in fact, just as an average person on the street, there's actually a demand for it, surprisingly enough, and to be able to transact.
Is there provision for, or is there some kind of criminality or being brought to the book to people who are not accepting all these terms that you speak about? Because we do know of situations and places that individuals go and they do not have the freedom or the liberty or the latitude to be able to pay with the ZWL. Yes.
So as it speaks, as we speak right now, in our framework, you can't turn away the ZW if someone offers it as an alternative to the US dollar payment. That's what they have, and it's considered legal tender. Now, there is what people may be familiar with, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit of the Reserve Bank.
Yes.
They've been very strict with cracking down of those who are, for example, pricing above the 10% margin range from bank rate with regards to pricing. Right, and of course insisting on only accepting US dollars, so on and so forth. There are legal sanctions that exist. For example, there's a civil sanction in the form of fines, as well as the possibility of revocation or suspension of business licenses.
Yes.
Also, the owners or directors of the company being held personally liable, right, by piercing the corporate veil, which means putting liability on the individual owners, not just the corporate body, which is the business itself. So there are sanctions with regards to this issue.
Yes, because there's a specific sector that just this past week did have certain sanctions put on them, and 20 businesses as well as licenses were revoked.
Yes.
And these were to do with the pharmaceutical industry here in Zimbabwe. And this was to do with that issue of taking on the speculative pricing route. Now, who can we say is to blame? I know it may be a very cornering question for you, but at the present moment, we did also read headlines that said businesses are pulling the government down. By virtue of that, we are experiencing all this turmoil in our economy. Who can you say is to blame in this whole matrix? And from your professional perspective, is there a level playing field, or people are playing the blame game?
Yeah. In fact, what I would say to that is that, listen, I'm just like the average Joe. I have access to the same information possibly as the next person through media, through press, with regards to, finding out who's truly responsible. It's not an active investigation on my part to find out, okay, where's the source of the problem.
But we want your legal perspective. We know. Perhaps you have things you don't want to say, and Zimbabwe is waiting to see.
Yes. In fact, what I will say to that is that what we must understand is that businesses and government create sort of like an interdependent symbiosis, right? The framework the government provides, right, to manage the economy or regulate transactions is the environment that the government creates for businesses to be able to thrive. At the same time, businesses are required to be the engine of the economy, to provide products and services that creates revenue, so on and so forth, that are taxable, right? So in a particular situation where you find that there is speculative pricing, who sets prices, right? It is typically who? The provider of that service or product. So when someone speculates on a price, the only one to attach that blame to is the person pegging the price. But of course, there are limitations to what people can do with regards to pricing, right? What typically tends to happen to manage a speculative pricing is issue to do with competition. Now, a healthy competitive environment tends to rein in errant pricing, right? Because you need to be competitive. So if you are overpricing, there's issues to do with you either being a monopoly in that sector or that industry, which gives you free rein now to overprice, right? Which is something the government can definitely rein in by making sure that we don't have over-monopolized industries, either by one or a handful of corporates, which can then dictate what the pricing mechanism is going to be. Because you've seen that in any major business industry, big corporates tend to cartel create some kinds of groupings, where they can sit and discuss the pricing models and such. But all that can be regulated, and there are mechanisms in place for it to be regulated. So the issue then for me, from what I observe, is that it just needs a stricter implementation of those policies and a consistent implementation of those policies, because it's not like the framework isn't there, right? It exists. The issue is implementation.
Implementation. And is the Financial Intelligence Unit doing enough with regards to carrying out some of the implementation of monitoring these policies?
That's a very good question, because I think they have limitations, right? The Financial Intelligence Unit can only typically regulate, monitor, sanction institutions that are legally registered. You register a company, you pay taxes, so on and so forth. You've got a VAT number, for example, so on and so forth. You are then in the realm of the regulatory bodies, right? The financial institution or intelligence guys can simply come in, inspect your books, so on and so forth, or observe your operations and come up with whatever conclusion they're going to come up with. But we have a situation where a lot of the revenue generated or circulating in our market is from the informal sector, right? The informal sector is largely unregulated for the simple fact that they tend not to be registered in the legal framework.
Oh, yes.
Then how then do you implement and exercise controls on unregulated bodies or institutions? So what that needs is that I believe the government can do more, right, to rein in situations where informal traders are forced to comply with the law of the land, so that at least, because essentially the country is making money, but we cannot account for it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that contribution. We will be interrogating more to do with the informal sector and its contribution vis-a-vis the macroeconomy, which is the businesses that are registered. This is Economics 101. We are here with Mr. Farai Museta. My name is Kurtley Gwindi. Please do stay tuned as we delve more into the legalities as well as framework around this economic situation Zimbabwe is facing. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Economics 101. Yes, we are in a conversation with Mr. Farai Museta, who is a legal expert. Now, back to you, sir. We did have a conversation earlier speaking to the informal sector and also appreciating how much of a role and input they play with regards to Zimbabwe's GDP. But at the same time, the everyday Zimbabwean would perhaps not understand what I'm about to bring to the table, which you did bring earlier, which is the gold backed currency. Now, please just expand more on that, and perhaps the everyday Zimbabwean, as well as those in the formal and informal sector, would want to know what is going on with that particular topic.
Yes, that's a very good topic, actually, because I believe it's a critical part of our economy that can actually steer us in the right direction, right? Gold-backed currency essentially is something that used to actually operate before the fiat system took over, which is essentially a speculative system where to say, okay, what's the true value of your currency? Most currencies were backed by gold. Right, so essentially what's happening is that the coming in of the gold coin essentially saying we have a currency of our own, which is the ZW, or whatever name you're going to give it, right? But it's backed by gold. Its intrinsic value is based in gold. So the price of gold, whatever it is, will give that currency that value. Right, this is a very good position for the country to be going in, for the simple reason that we no longer have to speculate on the value of our currency. It won't be determined by our balance of trade. It won't be determined by some foreign, or can I say, international banking institution to give us a value that we have no say in. It will be a situation where the gold itself, which is internationally accepted as a valuable commodity,
it's in the reserve.
Yes, that creates the reserve. Instead of having, for example, the US dollar is a reserve, the gold is your reserve. So if I take my gold coin, for example, to Singapore and I want to trade, the likelihood of them accepting my currency, even not knowing it, because it's gold backed, is much higher. So, which means someone will say, oh, it's a gold coin or it's a gold currency, they are more likely to accept it. So this currency is open to all, right? Of course, as it was introduced, some will argue the pricing is a bit high, so it's unreachable, so on and so forth. But that is because you are trying to create value.
Absolutely. And how effective is this? I mean, like I said, we are talking about the gold coin in relation to the everyday Zimbabwean, who perhaps won't necessarily have a piece or an appreciation of what is going on and how they can have access to it. Is it going to come to a value or to a point in time where someone who's within the informal sector can equate their goods or perhaps the currency to this gold coin?
To this gold coin, right? This is the important part of this whole arrangement. This is, how can I say, these are the crawling or the baby steps that have been taken towards using a gold currency. There is a lot of trial and error. People have, the government itself has to assess, okay, feasibility of it, values that are involved. So of course what they'll do, they'll peg it with what they believe is reasonable and see how the market reacts and then determine how to adjust pricing. So, but what is important to note is that it's accessible to all with regards to access, right? But what will happen is, like anything, any major shift in the way you trade is going to take time for the system to adopt itself. So for example, we will eventually reach a stage where you've got a lump sum in the bank, and the bank, you can cash out that money in the form of a gold coin, whatever value it is. That's because what's happening is that it's being commonly traded.
Yeah.
So sometimes you may not have purchased a gold coin, but you may acquire value through transactions, through wealth, through so on and so forth, and eventually end up with a gold coin without ever having to purchase it, but through exchange.
Okay.
So what happens is we need to create a scenario where the government embraces this move, bites the bullet, and simply transitions into this.
Absolutely.
That's what I believe.
All right. Thank you for that contribution. Now, within your space, Mr. Farai, in your personal capacity as well as your firm as a whole, you deal with individuals as well as clients who are within some of the key sectors of our economy. This is mining. These are the corporates. These are people within the agricultural space. How has this economic hullabaloo affected the businesses with regards to even the way you transact as well as the way they interact as a whole?
Yeah. What I can definitely say to that is that in terms of us, in terms of our doing business, of course, we are still able to get the similar volumes of work, depending, of course, on your brand, your reputation, so on and so forth, and your, competence. But businesses themselves, our clientele, what we have noted, of course, is that certain transactions we have had to create contingency arrangements, especially if they are ZW based, in order to account for an inflationary condition, to say that, okay, we are anticipating the duration of this transaction to reach its final conclusion in a certain amount of time. And since we're sticking to Zim dollar, we are in a situation where we have to create contingencies. So you'd find that companies are not typically trading the way they used to, because of speculation, they become fearful about engaging in certain transactions to say, okay, I wanted this yesterday, but tomorrow they might say this. Is it wise for me to move or to wait? Do you understand?
Absolutely.
That's the fear that any businessman would have, to say that, listen, that piece of machinery is worth this much today. Next week, if I have to buy it, I know my transportation has gone up.
Absolutely.
So is it going to make sense? And the amount of money I'm going to get, what am I going to charge for it? All these questions.
Because there's uncertainty. The everyday businessman is watching this program today. They perhaps want to have an appreciation of how best they can protect themselves and protect their businesses. We are speaking to a lawyer today, and perhaps we can have an appreciation of how best someone can enter a transaction without at the end getting hurt or losing money or losing the entire business.
Yes. Right. Well, there's many creative solutions, especially if we're going to restrict this answer to transactions. transactions, for example. You can
which is your area of focus. Yes.
So if we are to, for example, come into some form of a written agreement, right? Like I had mentioned just a little earlier, was the issue of creating contingency arrangements where value is pegged, right, by both parties in agreement to say, listen, whatever happens, this is what we're pegging the value to be, right? So typically what I've seen is that others who want to insist on trading in ZW, they create a US dollar value, but will still trade in ZW at the prevailing bank rate, for example. There will just simply be a clause to say it will not exceed this amount in US dollar value.
Okay.
However, when we transact at prevailing bank rates, that creates a little bit of confidence and an ability to forecast, plan, and budget with regards to going into the transactions. Others, of course, will prefer using the US dollar itself as a means of exchange. Perfectly acceptable. That's easier to deal with, actually. But when you, in terms of protecting going forward, there's a level of, how can I say, business will have to exercise a level of prudence.
And due diligence.
Due diligence, as well as some business acumen, as well as some street smart to say, okay, listen, is it smart for me to do it now or later?
And finally, as we close up, the importance of contracts and contractual agreements. Has it been emphasized with regards to the operation of Zimbabwean businesses, or it's something that it's still a bit far-fetched for many of these individuals who enter into transactions and enter into business agreements without forecasting, like you said?
Well, obviously, the advantage of engaging a lawyer, right, and putting things in writing or structuring something that is reflects the agreement these two people are having, right, is that there is protection in that.
Okay.
You are able to enforce your agreement in a court of law. You are able to pressure someone to perform if they're not performing. You're able to demand
something as simple as an affidavit.
Something as simple. I wouldn't say an affidavit because there's very many uses for an affidavit. But something that's reduced to an agreement where both parties are signing.
Okay.
Right. You are bound by what you sign. It's got the caveat subscriptor rule that basically says whatever you sign, you're bound to.
Okay.
So essentially, this allows now the legal framework to protect your arrangement because it's seen what you agreed to. You signed it. It means you agreed to it. The court simply has to now enforce it. Now we come to a problem where we're having a large bulk of revenues coming from informal sector. Right, the informal sector itself is hard to regulate. Since they're not legal, they tend not to naturally gravitate to a lawyer to govern their transactions. Absolutely. They do it the street way. Right? But that's when you find people crying that, oh, I got duped, or this happened, now they're unable to recover their money, and sometimes they come with false stories in a way to try to recover the money instead of what actually happened. You see, so that is where I encourage that informal sectors that, listen, regulation is not a cost. Right, formalizing is not a cost. Right, the advantage is that you are able to protect your business, right, from informal sector malpractice, if I can call it that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Farai Museta. Always an exciting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
We do expect to hear more from you in studio with obviously a better appreciation of what is happening in Zimbabwe when the economy would have turned around, and we'll be having a much better conversation with regards to solutions in Zimbabwe.
I look forward to that situation.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Economics 101, your go-to program for all things to do with the economy. Yes, we invite different individuals from different areas and sectors to dissect issues to do with Vision 2030 that we are still tracking here in Zimbabwe and here on ZBC TV. From me, Kurtley Gwindi, as well as the crew behind the scenes, it is a very good day, and God bless Zimbabwe.
ZBC News, the real African voice.